Somewhere in your garden right now, there is a delphinium 4 feet tall and still growing, a hollyhock pushing 6 feet, a dahlia loaded with buds that weighs more every single day. They look magnificent. They look strong. And the next heavy rainstorm, the kind that drops an inch in 20 minutes with wind that bends the trees, will snap every single one of them flat to the ground in a matter of seconds. Once a tall perennial falls, you cannot stand it back up. The stem kinks. The flowers face the mud. The vascular tissue at the bend crushes closed, and the bloom above that point starves. Not damaged. Ruined. For the rest of the season, I watched it happen to a 6-foot delphinium I had babied from bare root over 14 months. One June thunderstorm. 40 minutes of wind and rain. The spike was face down in the mulch by the time I got outside, kinked at the 2-foot mark like someone had stepped on it. I tried to straighten it. You cannot straighten it. That bend is permanent. The cells are broken. The flower above the kink opened at half size, facing sideways, and looked wrong for the next 6 weeks until I finally cut it down. 14 months of growing for 6 weeks of embarrassment. But if you stake them this week, before that storm hits, 2 minutes per plant saves 3 months of bloom. Soft twine, a bamboo cane, a figure-8 knot. That is the difference between a delphinium that blooms through August and one lying in the mud by the 4th of July. Here are the 6 perennials that need staking right now, in late June, before the summer storms arrive. I will give you the exact method for each one, and there is a universal rule that governs every single staking job. One principle that prevents the most common mistake gardeners make when they tie a plant to a support. I will get to that after we finish the list, because it applies to all 6 equally. I have been growing perennials for over 30 years. The first 15 of those years, I lost plants to storms I could have prevented. I would stand at the kitchen window watching the rain hammer my borders and just hope everything stayed upright. Hope is not a staking method. A friend of mine, a woman who has grown dahlias competitively for 2 decades, told me something I never forgot. She said, the day you plant a tall perennial, that is the day you stake it. Not the day before the storm, not the day the buds open, the day it goes in the ground. I did not listen the first time she said it. I listened after I lost an entire row of dinner plate dahlias to a storm that was not even severe. Just steady rain and a 15-mile-per-hour wind. That was enough. If you have tall perennials in your garden right now and they are not staked, you are running out of time. The weather in July does not ask permission. And one of the 6 plants I'm about to cover will fall even without a storm, under nothing but the weight of its own flowers. I will get to that one shortly. Let me start with the one that breaks my heart the most when it goes down. Delphiniums, the most dramatic perennial in any border and the most likely to snap in a storm. Hardy in zones 3 through 7, blooming from early June through July with flower spikes that reach 4 to 6 feet tall in colors that range from pale sky blue to deep violet to pure white. When a delphinium is standing upright in full bloom, there is nothing else in the garden that competes with it. The spikes are dense with individual florets, each one open and facing outward, and the color is so saturated it almost glows in afternoon light. My neighbor told me last summer that the delphiniums in my back border were the reason she started growing perennials at all. She saw them over the fence and asked what they were, but those stems are rigid and brittle. They do not flex in wind the way a coneflower or a rudbeckia does. They snap. One heavy rain, with any sideways wind, and the entire spike is on the ground, broken clean at the base or kinked halfway up. Stake each stem individually with a bamboo cane pushed into the soil about 6 inches from the base. Tie the stem to the cane with soft garden twine in a figure-8 loop. 1 loop around the stake, cross the twine over itself, 1 loop around the stem. The figure-8 prevents the tie from pressing the stem directly against the hard surface of the cane, and it allows the stem to thicken naturally through summer without being strangled. Tie at 2 points, 1/3 of the way up and 2/3 of the way up. The stake should be slightly shorter than the expected final height of the spike, so it disappears behind the flowers when they open. Nobody looking at your delphinium should see the stake. They should just see a perfect spike standing where nature never intended it to stand without help. Everything I have shown you so far falls because of wind. The next plant on this list falls without any wind at all, under the weight of its own flowers. And the fix is something you already own if you grow tomatoes. But before I get there, let me cover the tallest one on the list, because this one changes the conversation from supporting a stem to rethinking where you plant it in the first place. Hollyhocks. 6 to 8 feet tall in zones 3 through 9, blooming from June through August with flowers that open in sequence from the bottom of the stalk upward. Pink, red, yellow, white, deep burgundy, nearly black. A hollyhock in full bloom has the surface area of a small banner. Every flower is open, every petal catches wind, and the stem underneath all of that visual weight is hollow, not just thin, hollow. You can break one in your hand and see daylight through the center. That is why the snap, when it happens, is total. The stem folds. There is no partial bend with a hollyhock. It is standing or it is on the ground. Stake with a sturdy wooden or metal stake driven 18 inches into the ground directly behind each main stem. 18 inches matters more here than with any other plant on this list. These are tall, heavy plants in wet soil during a storm, and a stake that is only 6 inches deep will pull right out, taking the plant with it. You are not just supporting the stem, you are anchoring against leverage. A 6-foot stem with open flowers catching wind generates enough force at the base to yank a shallow stake clean out of soggy ground. So go deep. Tie at 3 points, 1 foot from the ground, 3 feet from the ground, and 5 feet from the ground. Hollyhock stems are thick enough to handle firm ties without damage, so you do not need to be as delicate as do with delphiniums. But here is what I learned after losing hollyhocks 3 years in a row, even with stakes. In very exposed locations, staking alone is not enough. The honest answer is to plant hollyhocks against a fence, a wall, or the side of a building where the structure itself blocks prevailing wind. I grow mine along the south side of my garage now, and the building does half the work. The stakes handle what the building does not. If yours are freestanding in an open border with nothing behind them, you have 2 choices. Stake them heavily with deeper posts and more tie points than you think you need, or move them this fall to a spot with some wind protection. That is not a failure of gardening, that is understanding that a 6-foot hollow stem in an open field is an engineering problem, not just a plant care problem. So far, we have been talking about wind as the enemy. One plant breaks because its stem is brittle, the other breaks because it is hollow and catches wind like a sail. Both of those problems come from outside the plant. What comes next is different. The next plant on this list destroys itself from the inside out on a perfectly calm day with no storm anywhere in the forecast. Dahlias. Every dinner plate dahlia flower, the big ones, the 8 to 10 inch blooms, weighs enough to pull the stem sideways the moment it opens fully. A single bush producing 10 to 15 of those blooms simultaneously becomes so top-heavy that the outer stems splay outward and the inner stems lean and cross. I have seen dahlias collapse on a perfectly calm, dry August morning. No wind, no rain. Just gravity and the accumulated weight of too many open flowers pulling the plant apart from the center. My friend who grows dahlias competitively told me this is the single biggest reason hobby growers lose their plants. Not disease, not frost, not insects. Wait, the plant grows itself into a shape it cannot sustain. The fix is a tomato cage. Place a standard wire tomato cage over each dahlia plant now in late June, while the stems are still short enough to grow up through the rings. The cage supports the entire bush from all sides without requiring you to tie individual stems. The plant grows through the cage. The foliage hides the wire within 2 weeks, and when those heavy blooms open in August, the cage holds everything upright invisibly. If your dahlia is already too tall for a cage, and some of yours probably are by late June, drive 3 stakes in a triangle around the plant and run horizontal string between the stakes at 12 inches high and 24 inches high. You are creating a corral. The stems lean against the string instead of falling to the ground. This is the technique commercial dahlia growers use on hundreds of plants at a time. And the reason they use it is simple. It works on a Tuesday morning in dead, calm air, just as well as it works in a storm. because with dahlias, the storm is not the problem. The flowers are. Now, the one almost everyone watching has already lost this year. Your peonies are probably face down in the mud right now. Here is why you can still save the remaining blooms, even though the timing is not ideal. Peace. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, blooming in May and June with flowers that are heavy, soaked with water after rain, and sitting on stems that were never designed to hold them upright. A fully open double peony bloom can hold a tablespoon of rainwater cupped in its petals. Multiply that by 30 blooms on one bush, and you have a plant carrying more than a pound of water weight on stems that are pencil thin at the base. Every gardener who has grown peonies has walked out after a rainstorm and found every single bloom face down in the dirt. The stems bend right at ground level, and once they bend, the flowers drag through the mud. They are still alive, still blooming, just blooming into the ground where nobody can see them. And here is the thing, the real fix for peonies is a peony ring. A metal hoop on 3 legs that you place over the plant in early spring when the red shoots are just 2 or 3 inches tall. The foliage grows up through the hoop, the stems thread themselves through naturally, and when the heavy flowers open weeks later, the ring holds them at the right height. The plant looks like it is supporting itself. It is not. The ring is doing all the work underneath the foliage when no one can see it. If you missed that early spring window, and most of you did because nobody thinks about staking in March, you can still rescue the plant right now. Push the peony ring down over the top of the bush carefully and lift the fallen stems through the ring one at a time. It is awkward. Some stems will not cooperate, and you will snap a flower or two getting them threaded through. But the blooms that remain will face upward instead of downward for the rest of their season. And that is worth 10 minutes of wrestling with a muddy peony bush. I did this last year with a peony that had been flat for a week after a storm. I saved about 20 blooms out of 30. The ones I saved looked clean and upright for another 2 weeks. The 10 I lost were the price of being a week late. Next spring, the ring goes on in March. This year, the late rescue still gave me 2 weeks of flowers I would have had 0 of otherwise. That math works every time. I want to pause here before the last 2 because something has shifted and I want to make sure you caught it. The first 2 plants on this list, Delphiniums and Hollyhocks, break because of forces outside the plant. Wind, rain, leverage. The solution is external support, a stake strong enough to resist those forces. Dahlias introduced a different idea. The threat is internal, the plant's own weight, and the solution is a cage or corral that contains the sprawl rather than bracing against a storm. Peonies introduced something else entirely. The late rescue, proof that even if you miss the window, you have not lost everything. Each plant requires you to think about support differently. And these last 2 push that even further. One of them challenges whether you need a stake at all. The other one can be injured by staking itself if you do it carelessly. Tall phlox. Garden phlox, the tall variety, grows 3 to 4 feet in zones 4 through 8, blooming from July through September, with dense, rounded flower heads in shades of pink, white, magenta, and soft lavender. A mature clump produces dozens of stems, each one topped with a cluster of flowers that catches rain like a sponge. The flower heads get waterlogged after a summer downpour, and the stems, which are stiff but thin, simply cannot hold the added weight. Unpinched tall phlox after a heavy July rain lies flat across the border, crushing whatever shorter plants were growing in front of it. Now, if you already pinch them back in mid-June using the Chelsea chop, cutting each stem by about a third, then your phlox is shorter and sturdier right now and may not need staking at all. That is worth repeating because it changes the model. With every other plant on this list, the answer has been to add support. With phlox, the answer can be to change the plant itself so it does not need support. The Chelsea chop delays bloom by 2 or 3 weeks, but produces a bushier, more compact plant with more stems, each one shorter and stronger than the single tall stem it replaced. The trade is a later bloom window in exchange for a plant that stands on its own through most storms. My husband noticed the difference before I pointed it out. He said the phlox looked thicker this year. It was, because I had cut it back 3 weeks earlier and it had responded by branching. If you did not pinch, and you still have those tall, single-stemmed phlox swaying in the breeze, they need support now. Use grow-through metal grids placed at about 2 feet high. The stems grow up through the square openings in the grid and are held upright at exactly the point where they are most likely to bend. These grids are available at any garden center, and they last for years. Alternatively, use 3 stakes pushed into the ground in a triangle around the clump and run a ring of string at the 2-foot mark. Same principle. Hold them where they bend. There is 1 plant left, and it is the most deceptive of all 6. It looks fine right now. The spike is forming. The stem is straight. Everything seems solid. But it has a failure point underground that makes staking it more dangerous than not staking it if you do it wrong. Gladiolus, hardy in zone 7 through 10, grown as a summer bulb everywhere else, blooming from July through September, with flower spikes that reach 3 to 4 feet on stems that are the most fragile in any summer garden. The colors run from white through salmon, orange, crimson, deep purple, and a pale green that looks almost unreal in morning light. The spike opens from bottom to top over about 2 weeks, which means the weight shifts as each new flower opens higher on the stem. When the bottom flowers are fading and the top flowers are at peak, the center of gravity moves upward and the stem becomes a lever. Any wind at all, even a breeze that you would not notice while walking outside, can snap the stem at the base. I have lost gladiolus spikes on days when I would not have described the weather as windy. Just a steady 10-mile-per-hour breeze catching a fully open spike. That was enough. Each gladiolus spike needs its own individual thin bamboo stake pushed in at planting time. That is the ideal. If you planted your corms back in April or May and did not stake then, you can still do it now, but you have to understand the risk. The corm is underground, typically 4 to 6 inches deep, and positioned directly beneath the base of the stem. If you push a stake straight down next to the stem, you can drive it directly through the corm. A pierced corm will rot. You will lose the plant entirely, and you will not know it happened until the stem yellows and topples weeks later from below. By then, the corm is mush, and there is nothing to save. The fix is to angle the stake slightly away from the base, about 2 inches out, and push it straight down. This gives you clearance to miss the corm while still getting the stake close enough to support the stem. Tie once at the midpoint and once just below the lowest flower bud. Soft twine. Figure 8. And go slowly when you push that stake in. If you feel resistance below the soil surface, stop, pull the stake out, move it another inch away from the base and try again. The 30 seconds you spend being cautious saves a corm that took all spring to establish roots. Look, here is the universal rule I promised at the beginning, and it applies to every single plant I just covered. Never tie directly against the stem with hard wire, plastic zip ties, or anything that does not flex. The stem grows thicker through summer. Every perennial stem adds girth as the season progresses. A rigid tie that fits snugly in late June will be cutting into the stem by August, girdling the vascular tissue, choking off water and nutrients to everything above the tie. The stem does not push the tie off. The stem grows into the tie, and by the time you notice the damage, the tissue above the constriction is already dying. I have seen it on delphiniums where someone used a twist tie from a bread bag. The stem swelled around the wire until the wire was completely embedded in the bark, invisible from the outside, but strangling the stem in a ring all the way around. The flowers above that point wilted and never recovered. Always use soft garden twine, fabric strips, or stretchy plant ties. Always use the figure 8 method. 1 loop around the stake, cross, 1 loop around the stem. The crossing point creates a buffer of space between the stake and the stem, so the stem never presses against a hard surface, and the loops flex as the stem thickens through July and August. Make ties firm enough to hold the stem in place during wind, but loose enough that you can slip a finger between the tie and the stem. If you cannot fit a finger, it is too tight. Loosen it now or cut it off and re-tie. A tie that is too tight is worse than no tie at all, because a plant with no stake falls over and might recover. A plant with a strangling tie dies from the tie point up, and you blame the weather when the real killer was your own knot. And always stake before the plant needs it. A stem that has already fallen and kinked cannot be fully straightened. You can prop it up, you can tie it to a stake in its new position, but the kink remains. The vascular tissue at that bend is crushed, the flow of water is restricted, and the flower above the kink will never reach full size. It will open smaller, paler, and facing the wrong direction. You did not save the bloom. You preserved the evidence of when you were too late. I lost a summer's worth of delphiniums learning that lesson. I lost hollyhocks. I lost an entire bed of dinner plate dahlias that my friend had given me as tubers from her own stock. Those were not replaceable from a catalogue. They were a gift, and I let them fall because I thought I had another week before the storm started. I did not have another week. Neither do you. 6 plants, 2 minutes each, 12 minutes total this weekend, and your garden survives every storm July throws at it. That is a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and a ball of twine, bamboo canes for the delphiniums and gladiolus, heavy stakes driven deep for the hollyhocks, tomato cages or string corrals for the dahlias, peony rings even if you have to wrestle them on late, grow-through grids for the phlox or the Chelsea chock next year if you catch them early enough. Each plant, a different failure point. Each failure point, a different solution. But one principle underneath all of them: support the stem before it falls. Give it room to grow. And never use a tie that does not flex. The gardener who stakes before the rain watches the storm from inside, coffee in hand, knowing everything out there is tied, supported, and standing exactly where it should be. The gardener who waits is outside in the downpour, trying to prop up broken stems with one hand and holding an umbrella with the other, watching 14 months of growing bend sideways into the mulch. We both know which one you have been. I was that gardener for 15 years. Do it today, this weekend, before the forecast changes. Which of these 6 do you have in your garden right now? Tell me in the comments. And if you have a staking method that works better than anything I showed, something you figured out yourself or learned from someone who has been at this longer than I have, share it. Every gardener watching has lost a plant to a storm they could have prevented. The ones who share what they learned are the reason the rest of us stop making the same mistakes. I will see you next week. There is more I want to show you.